Let's speak to Professor Anthony Glees, intelligence and security expert at the University of Buckingham. Anthony, it's good to have you on the programme again.
Yeah, good morning, Matt. Good morning.
It's been a while. What do you think is going on here?
Well, I'm sorry to have to say that I think what's going on is extremely dangerous, and I think the prognosis for the future looks really, really grim unless NATO and the European powers in NATO decide to turn the tables and start treating Putin as the enemy that he is to all of us in Europe, most of all to people in Eastern Europe, but to all of us in Europe. Because I don't think Putin is just flexing his muscles. It could well be that the Kazakh plane was a mistake, and that's perfectly possible. The Russians and their supporters are entirely reckless. We know that. Rather more serious, I think, is what's going on in the Baltic. And Putin is testing us. That's the point. He's testing us to see at what point we will turn and say, actually, we've had enough. If you carry on doing this, it will mean an armed conflict sooner or later. And you and the Russian people have got to understand that. We've got to make that crucial twist, which is going to be very, very difficult to make, because on the 20th of January, Donald Trump re-enters the Oval Office. And I think Donald Trump, for all his faults, is a man of peace. I think he's a peacenik, and he will do anything not to show American strength to Putin. And that is precisely why the future looks so dangerous today.
Just briefly on this cable, I mean, we talk about a cable, but this was the main cable that gave Estonia its electricity, its power, at a time of Christmas, Christmas heating, Christmas fairy lights, all the rest of it. I mean, this is really quite serious, isn't it?
Yes, it is a potential act of war, and we need to call it that. And our politicians need to call it that. Sir Keir Starmer needs to call it that. And we need to then do the things that go with calling it an act of war. People should never forget Putin. When pointy-headed people like me are asked to interpret what Putin's intentions are, we will always say, well, you don't really need to interpret them. You just need to look at what he's done and listen to what he says. And what he says is entirely clear, that he wants the post-1997 NATO states to remove NATO infrastructure and remove all NATO forces from their territory. Now, why would he want to do that? There's only one answer to that question, and our response has got to be tough. And in America, Trump and his advisors look back to what they regard as the golden age of Ronald Reagan and the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, which you and I remember so well, man. What they forget is that Reagan was anything other than a peacenik. I mean, Russia backed down over the Berlin Wall because Reagan agreed to rearm NATO. He called the Soviet Union the evil empire. Well, we need language like that from Trump, but we're not going to get it. And therefore, I think we have to do the necessary ourselves in Europe, however painful it is, because the only way of avoiding World War III is to deter him.
I mean, it's about a mindset, isn't it? Because the acts of Soviet aggression against the United States at a time when Reagan was rearming NATO and using that kind of language was much less than the kind of acts of Russian aggression that we've actually seen in recent years, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Ukraine. These are real invasions by Russian armies of sovereign countries. So what does that tell you about our mindset? We're not prepared to go there because we don't want to contemplate a country at war with a power like Russia. We can't get ourselves into that frame of mind for various reasons, obvious ones.
Well, we're democracies, Matt. That's the point. And democracies do not like waging war. Democracies never wage war on other democracies. We never have waged war on another democracy. And I think what people are very reluctant to understand is that Russia is an authoritarian, fascistic a dictatorship, much as Nazi Germany was. And we may want to ignore history. I mean, I do think I have to say that huge support in this country, in everywhere, even in the smallest town in the Shires where we live, for Ukraine, shows that there is a collective folk memory in this country, even for those happily born after the end of the Second World War. We know what it is like to be threatened and then attacked by a foul dictator, and that's why we're on Ukraine's side here. But other people, like to forget it. And above all, Putin himself believes in history. He studied history very carefully. And he remembers that what turned the last European war of 1939 into the World War of 1941 was the pact between the then Soviet Union and Germany. And Germany is once again going to be pivotal as we move into 2025 in the future. They've got an important election there. Putin undoubtedly hopes to have some kind of a pact with the AfD in Germany to make Germany neutral. And if he can do that, then those post 1997 NATO countries, and we're talking about, Poland, Finland, you name it, the Baltic republics, they are going to be toast. So I think that, we need the resolve. We need to say to Putin, no, the Baltic is not your sea. The Baltic is an international waterway. You are trying to cut off the Baltic republics and Northeast Europe from NATO. This is an act of war, and we will do something to ensure that you do not get away with this for nothing.
Right.
And that's what NATO is about.
So I'm looking at my text messages coming in here, and I would say they're equally divided between those who think that, you and I are warmongers and those who think that actually we should, we agree with you and say we should stand up to Putin far more. Someone writing in saying, look, go easy on Trump. He's the only man, who can bring about some kind of peace with Vladimir Putin because he gets on with him. There'll be a deal done over Ukraine and there'll be security guarantees for Ukraine short of NATO membership. Let's just move on. And, the UK itself is not threatened by Russia. So what on earth are we going on about? What do you say to them?
Well, the first thing that I would say is the UK is threatened by Russia. Ask the people of Salisbury whether they feel threatened by Russia. Putin wants to feel he can intervene in our domestic affairs in this country, our domestic security issues in this country at will. And that's what he has done. And he knows that compared to Russia, the United Kingdom, Western Europe, they're very, very rich countries with lots of money. And money is one of the things that Putin is also obsessed with. He has used money in order to extend Russian power. So there's every reason to believe that Putin is actually interested in interfering in what goes on in this country. It's the same argument, Matt, that people had in 1939 and 1940. Should you appease Hitler? After all, Hitler said he would give Britain a free hand in its empire if we gave him a free hand in Europe. And Churchill understood that that was a completely nonsensical formulation, that to give Hitler a free hand in Europe would ultimately mean that Hitler would control what we did in this country. And it's exactly the same with Putin. Putin's read the same history books that you and I have, and he can see to his advantage. And a weak Germany, don't let's forget, a lot of the trouble we're in now came from poor old Angela Merkel being fandoozled by Putin over Crimea and over cheap gas and oil. That has created the economic collapse that is the story of Germany right now. Practically a collapse. I wouldn't overdo it, but it's a very serious economic situation because of the reliance on Russian oil and gas, because Merkel appeased Putin when it came to Crimea. If we'd said no, as Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan would have done, Putin would have withdrawn. He's weak. He's a coward. His Botox smirk tell us he is a coward.
Okay.
And how you deal with cowards is to say no, and we'll punch you between the eyes if you carry on doing this.
Goodness gracious. Professor Anthony Glees, one final question with one answer, one word answer, please. Will Donald Trump start World War III or get the Nobel Peace Prize?
He is more likely to start World War III, but it's not going to happen at once, Matt.